Welcome back everyone to J-Face Games. Today we're talking about the, I should say alpha test. Alpha test. Now, the caveat here. My buddies and I, we play a weekly game. It's been a 4E game for the most part. We switched over to Quest just for a little bit, but mostly we have a 4E game. I suggested to two of them, hey, what do you think about us doing potentially a quick beta test of my game, or alpha test? And they were all about it. Some of them giving me advice and thoughts on it thus far. And so the caveat I'll put in there is that I didn't really prep much. Like I wanted to see, in essence, what the base game felt like and what it would feel like to just throw monsters together and see what happened. Okay. And so what was and to teach them the full rules. What did that feel like? How did that, verbiage come out of my mouth when I'm trying to explain it, and how much confusion did they have? And so these are sort of the results, right? Some of the results were that if I were going to do it again, I don't think I would use a map. So I just grabbed like a tavern map, and then I sectioned off areas with different colored boxes to represent zones. I'd get rid of the map, right? The reason I would do that, I would just use like literally blank index cards or blank like white rectangles, mainly because I think that it allows the players to invoke more imagery of what the room might be like. What I mean by that is that when you have a map with a lot of details, I think that that's great for hex-based or square-based combat, because the nature of that combat in general is like I'm interacting with things and I'm being very tactical in movement. But the zone-based combat, meaning that you can do anything inside that zone, I felt like it's better I thought it would be more invoking of their imagination of, oh, is there a table around that I can jump behind, or is this, because it just didn't work. I don't think it worked as cleanly when it was on the map, but that could have just been me, but that was my thoughts. Okay, so what are some other things? One, the D8 was really good. Now we mostly fought a lot of like small mobs, but my buddy who had a defender dice of D8, he was just like, he was rolling 7s and 8s the whole time. So these mobs couldn't touch him, which is, it was great. I had to bring in another monster, and I had to bring in sort of some other special powers to give him a little bit of stress. But the D8 was really good. Now, the other side, the D4, was really hard or harsh. I had a buddy who had a defensive dice of a D4, and he was the striker. He was the one who was doing lots of damage, and it was cool to see him. One, he had the D8 attack die for his striker, so it was cool to see him use one action to attack two different monsters with D6s instead of D8s and actually kill both of them. Boom, boom. So that was fun, because then he felt like, oh man, I'm whipping through these things. And it also felt exciting to see him with his D4, like the defender had to come help him, because with that D4, he was getting pummeled by things. And so that was nice to see that this felt good in terms of like, oops, I'm used to using Obsidian now. This felt good in terms of like, it was stressful for him. This felt really powerful. He might have been just rolling great, but it felt really powerful. Now, I don't know if that means it has to be all changed around and broken up, but it was something to note, right? The next thing is the idea of monsters potentially having the number of monsters on you determines the DC to defend and how much damage is done. What I mean by that is that if you got a lot of little mobs, and that could be monster design, but there was a lot of little monsters that they were fighting like a bunch of goblins, right? And when there were like 3 or 4 goblins on someone, it just felt, I don't know, I had an issue with theme when I was playing. I had an issue with, it was all just very quick rolling and no one was really moving, right? There wasn't a lot of like, I need to go here, I need to do this. So it didn't feel tactical. It didn't feel like there was thematic agency and like, oh, I gotta get over here. It just felt like, all right, it's the monster's turns. Roll your defense 4 times. Doop, 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 doop. All right, they didn't hit you or they hit you. And it was probably on me in terms of DMing, but it also, like, to me, it felt weird. So I think it might be more interesting to think about this where it's like, if you have a couple monsters on you and they're of the same type, that they just the number of monsters then determines the DC for which you're defending against and how much damage it's going to do, and it's just a 1 defense against it, right? Now we'll get into that in terms of, there's some other mechanics I've thought about, especially with health and trauma, but something along these lines of like, okay, how does the number of monsters on you, does that change just quickly? There's still just 1 attack or 1 defense against you, and there's just, depending on the number of monsters, maybe that changes how much damage or what the defense is, okay? So that's another thing. Finally, let's get to health and trauma. There's a couple other things to talk about, but let's get to health and trauma. I didn't think this didn't work out well. And so what I mean by that is that I thought that there was just it would be interesting to see if this group played 3 times, if all of a sudden it was second nature. But there was a language issue there for sure in terms of like hits versus like attack versus hits. You know, we talk about the number of hits you do is the damage. And I think that was a language issue because a lot of people would, like when I would say, you know, you get +1 hits, they would say, oh, so I got +1 to this attack, so I'm gonna roll d4 +1. And I was like, no. So there was some nomenclature issues that can be cleaned up pretty quickly. But the health and trauma, the major, minor, and the stress, I felt like for the d4 player who had d4 defense, you know, there were some times I was able to do some minor stress to him and minor trauma, and then it felt like, oh my gosh, there was some agency. But for the most part, it just didn't feel great, right? That's not to say we scrap it, but what it made me think about is instead of having all of that, maybe you simplify it. And this is sort of taking a page out of, what's the game? Savage Worlds, right? Where if you don't know Savage Worlds, they have this interesting system where it's like you have 3 wounds to give, but in order to get those wounds, you have to be, there's a condition that gets put on you. And until you've got that condition on you, you can't actually take damage. So it's first you take the condition, then you get damage, or something along those lines. But the way they do the conditions is actually on a successful hit. So if you're like successfully hit by, you know, more than a certain amount, then you're like waylaid, or it's not waylaid, but something, and then you'll take a wound if you get further past that. So the idea of having maybe stressed is a condition, right? And only when you have the stressed condition can you then take damage, right? And then we could say that your health is a dice. It's either like d4, 6, 8. So we keep with the theme that we have these dice, right? And so now you have this interesting situation where you don't have a lot of hit points. You've only got 4 hit points. And it might be that certain monsters do, you know, 2 hit point attacks, 3 hit point attacks, maybe even 4 hit point attacks. Maybe if there's a troll, maybe he hits for 4. And so a mage does not want to be hit once by a troll. But you first have to be put in a situation where you have this stress condition on you. And so then you can think about, well, what causes a stress condition? Maybe stress condition is if you have more than 1 monster engaged with you, you are stressed. But if you take a feat like Sentinel, or you have some sort of feat that allows you to be really good at fighting, or maybe if you have a shield, just having a shield means that 2 monsters don't make you stressed. But if you have 3 monsters, now you're stressed. Maybe that's one condition. Maybe there are powers that monsters have that they could stress you. Maybe if you get hit successfully, then you are stressed until your next turn. Then at the beginning of your turn, the condition is wiped, right? But then you might have things that are cool, like you could also put yourself into a stressed condition state, and you do so to allow yourself to do like more damage or pluses to hit, or to increase the teamwork die, right? So you could have that scenario where it's like, I'm gonna actually make myself stressed right now, but for some benefit of the group. And now if I could get a hit and it'd be really bad. So this might be an alternative method for dealing with health. you know, just to make it more streamlined. Now, this doesn't solve the situation of tactics and thematics, because like the big thing for me during the alpha was it didn't really feel highly tactical, and it didn't feel highly thematic, right? What that really means is that it probably means there's a lot more load needing to be put on the monster design or something along those lines, or something mechanically that's, you know, either it's bogged down or whatever. So we'll figure it out. We'll iron it out, because I'm going to be doing a beta test with these guys pretty much weekly now. What else? What if... So this was an interesting idea. This is just a random idea, but what if instead of... well, I still love the target number, damage number, bloodied, so I think I'm going to stick with that, but I randomly came up with the idea of what if there was a more simplistic mechanic of dice roll divided by 2 rounded down, and that is damage dealt is damage absorbed, right? Meaning that it's like if I roll a d4, this kind of goes to that idea from the last video of GB or Gubat Banois, where it's that violence dice, where it's like you're always, if you are in combat, stuff's happening. And so by rolling a d4, if I roll a 2 or a 3, that's 1 hit. I'm just doing 1 damage immediately, right? If I roll a 1, I'm not doing any damage. If I roll a 4, I'm doing 2 damage, right? So it's immediately just doing damage. You're always doing damage. Just depending on the dice type, depends on what your potential damage output is, right? And then when you're defending, the same kind of concept, like monsters are going to hit you, they're going to do damage, and it's a matter of how much of an absorbing of the damage are you able to do. So that was but this concept would have to be, you'd have to change the hit point. You would actually just do straight hit points or something else. But I thought it was an interesting idea that kind of spawned off the concept from the violence dice, right? I also said that we might need, I'm going to copy this because I had this note over here. This was already taken care of in the last video. Oh, nope, can't copy it. Might need a ranged stat versus melee stat for Striker. That was already talked about in the last video, that Striker dice is really good, so you probably have to split it up. Another thing I noted is that statistically speaking, if you have, this is just, once again, we're just kind of playing around with other ideas. A d20 plus d4 in essence equals the same kind of spread as a d20 plus 2. And a d20 plus d6 equals 1d20 plus 3. d20 plus d8 equals 1d20 plus 4. And the only reason I bring this up is that there's this, if I wanted to go into more of a math, like a d20 style system, you could still have these d4s, because this gives you an idea of what, in essence, I thought it was very interesting that when I looked at this, having a d20 plus a d4 versus having a d20 plus a d6, only mathematically, yes, you had a higher potential range, you could get to 26 versus 24, but statistically getting like a 10 or an 11 on one versus the other was the equivalent of having like a +1 to a d20 roll, right? So I thought that was interesting. I could see potentially going down a route where maybe we use this as a base mechanic. I don't like the math part, and to be honest, my buddies who were in the beta, they loved being able to just roll a single die and just give a number, and that was that. They didn't have to worry about adding pluses to it. They didn't have to worry about all of those things. They felt like that was very fast. So they loved that part. They felt like it was fast. They felt like the target number, bloodied numbers, and death numbers was cool. And the highlight of the session was the teamwork die. They loved, even though there wasn't even someone on there who was a leader, they loved the teamwork die. And so I honestly want to start trying to base the game a little bit more around the concept, potentially, of the teamwork die. What are some other brainstorms? I'm gonna get all this down. This might be a longer video, but I want to get it all down because I thought there was some good, interesting thoughts coming from this. Monsters don't have to have attacks and multi-attacks. They could have, in essence, traits or situationals. What I mean by this could just mean that the goblins are surrounding you, so as a group they now do X damage. So we already mentioned that above, but the other thing it might be is like you have a troll might make a savage onslaught or a grab and throw, right? So instead they have this situational savage onslaught, and what that does is that yes, it's going to do a certain amount of damage, and it's going to do a certain amount of damage automatically, etc. if it hits. But I think it opens up this space of maybe that savage onslaught is a bunch of attacks, maybe that savage onslaught is one massive swing. There is some RP elements there that it automatically forces the DM potentially to, not forces, I don't want to say that, but it opens up the ability for the DM to describe what that means and potentially do other things with that, as opposed to the goblin has 2 attacks and it's just roll, roll, here we are. Which once again, it could have been just encounter design, but I felt like it was just a roll fest with quick checks to see, was it a hit, was it not, was it a hit, was it not, and so it didn't feel as good. I'm pretty harsh on myself though, so take that with a grain of salt. What else do we have? Maybe this was a big maybe. This would be a huge shift. But maybe as a huge shift, instead of attribute dice being locked, meaning that striker D6, defender D8, etc. Instead of it being locked, you have them situational. They are instead situational. What does that mean? Well, if you are surrounded, your defender die is a D4. So maybe like normal one-on-one, defender die is a D6. Whoops. Surrounded. Oof. Surrounded defender die is a D4. High ground, defender die is a D8. Maybe this would force that thematic tactical scenario where it's like, look, I gotta get, if I'm gonna have a good strike, I gotta get in a good position. And that you could have feats that would change this, obviously. So you're one-on-one and you're a duelist. Well, now if you're one-on-one and you're a duelist, you've got a D8, right? You don't have to have the high ground. So I think that I don't know if I'm going to go this way, but these are the things that I like to throw these ideas out there just to kind of throw them out there. Now, what would this mean for regular attributes? I have no idea. Maybe you would have, maybe you could rank them up still so that you could have, okay, for me, my normal's a D8, and if I'm surrounded, it's a D6. Maybe you could rank them up a little bit, like you could be proficient in certain dice, but I don't know, but I wanted to throw it out there. That might throw the whole game on its head, but that's fun sometimes. And the final thing that I wanted to say is that I think that what I'm going to do here from now on, moving forward, is I'm going to pose a lot of questions. And someone in the comments recently talked about posing questions for, I think bigger picture of what the game design is going to be. But for here, I'm thinking just combat tactical wise. And some of the questions I had was like, in order to develop tactical combat, answer the following. So it might be, why do I want to be one-on-one? Why do I want to move around in the zone? Why do I want or not want to have more than one target engaged with me? Like, why would I not want to be engaged or just nearby a target? I don't know. I think that, why do I want us both to be? Why should we both be engaged with a target? Why might I want to be a short distance, right? And I think that if we can iron out some of these questions, like what's the benefit or just the natural benefit that happens that you're going to have with just positioning? Because in all honesty, I would love to be able to have a game that if you didn't have any feats or powers, it was still fun to play. Like you could just play bland in essence, right? That the base mechanics of where I am and what I'm doing and what that means for me in terms of my attack versus my defense versus my, ranged versus controlling, like that matters enough just with base mechanics. Then we have feats and powers to manipulate those base mechanics to give you a little bit of an advantage. So that's where my head's at right now. I'm usually pretty critical about myself in general, or about games in general. So of course I'm gonna be critical and I'm gonna try and think through all this stuff, but these are some random things that came in my brain. I think my goal is gonna be the teamwork dice, really, or in essence gonna be teamwork pool. Because I could envision if I'm playing at a table that in essence you just have tokens and you throw it in the middle and there'd be a pool in the middle that's building up, because they loved that part. So I think that I'm gonna focus really on the mechanic of that teamwork die or the teamwork pool and how you affect it. And I think that I really want to focus on these questions down here and potentially thinking about this stress condition here. And I'd be curious for you guys where you land on some of this other stuff, in the middle here, these situational dice, anyways, I'll leave it at that. It's a long video. I appreciate you guys tuning in, for those of you that tuned in the whole time, and hit a bell, hit a subscribe, and leave a comment, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya.